I would like to welcome everyone this afternoon to Cadence Security's first of this year's webinar series. Let me start with a brief introduction of Cadence Security. My name is John Police. I'm the VP of Sales for Cadence Security. Cadence is part of the SEE group of companies. We have been exclusively providing security, risk, and compliance services and solutions to organizations of all sizes and industries for more than 15 years now. Our tenure has given us a great depth and expertise into cybersecurity and risk management. Most notably, it has allowed us to develop managed services in key areas that have complemented many of our customers' security programs over the years, one of which we will be discussing today. Over the years, third-party risk management has become an integral part of cybersecurity and data protection. However, it has brought on many challenges to organizations, both large and small. We have seen a significant increase in third-party risk providers in the past 24 months. Now, you would think this would bring guidance and clarity for organizations. In some respects, yes, although it seems to bring a level of confusion and complexity as well. I believe this is due to the influx of vendor solutions that are available. You have standalone application platforms, additive modules to GRC and vendor management application suites, also vendor monitoring and data analytics and reporting services, not to mention managed services. So it's safe to assume most of the people that are here today are responsible for third-party risk in some capacity within your organizations. But I want to take a moment to review why third-party risk has been gaining such attention. Organizations today have a good handle on their perimeter and internal security, that's for certain. However, more and more, organizations are leveraging outsourced or third parties, if you will, entities to support many business tasks. Now, while this provides efficiencies and a competitive edge, it also promotes a great deal of risk. The Ponemon Institute conducted a poll of several organizations, and it found the following to be true. The number one concern for this year among organizations is third-party risk management. Also, more than half the respondents cannot confidently say that they are aware of all the vendors that they are doing business with today, nor do they really know what those vendors have access to. Also, just over a third of the respondents can confidently say that they have the resources to support an effective third-party risk program. Now, breaches due to third parties are common, and they continue to increase. This has brought awareness to many industries. However, this is an upstream conversation where you need to justify to your board and your leadership why you need the funding to support a vendor risk program, coupled with the fact that asking for funding of a non-budgeted initiative can be a very lengthy and challenging process. The publicity of major breaches has brought regulation and governance to many industries. We see this time and time again, this going forward year over year. Many times this can make funding available though, and can be the catalyst for a vendor risk program. But it carries with it another challenge. When that conversation now changes, it's inverted, it's a downstream conversation, you start to hear things from the board leadership asking you questions like, what are we doing about this? And when will we have an answer? So now you're forced to really deliver quickly. Essentially, there are three primary components that make up a third-party risk program. And we'll go through them here. The first is you need to identify your vendors, collect and validate all necessary due diligence information. So what this means is you need to first understand who you're doing business with from a vendor perspective. Once you've done that, then you need to classify those vendors into specific classifications or categories, if you will. That's going to allow you to understand which ones promote the most critical and high-level risks to your organization, and which ones really don't, and what other ones fall in the middle, so moderate risks or somewhat high risk. This is going to allow you then to figure out what you need to ask, the information you need to gather. And then you need to, once you collect that information, you need to validate that the information that you've received is actually accurate and truthful. And we'll go into that in a little more detail. The second primary component is you need to review and you need to analyze all the information that's now been collected. And this is going to help you to identify with the inherent risks of those vendors, whether they're low risks or high risks. Are there no risks or are there significant risks? And then the third component is you need to identify, or you need to agree rather, if you're going to accept the risks that are inherent with those vendors, what level of risk is going to be accepted, what level of risk is not going to be accepted. But more importantly, identifying the gaps of those unaccepted risks and then deciding what the remediation plans would be. Now, these last two primary components, these require risk management skills to perform them. The first component you're going to find is the most time-consuming of the three. But you don't need risk management skills to accomplish that first component. So of these three components, there's really one here that you can get a lot of help from, and it'll actually help you push your throughput. So for this webinar presentation, we're going to focus on the first component. This is really where you can get the biggest lift to your program by using a managed service. So if we look at this first component, the industry standard is to collect and validate all the necessary due diligence information. So let's break this process down some. You begin to build out your program. Once you've decided on a program, you need to build the assessment content. So what are the questions you're going to ask? What's the content that you're going to collect? And is this going to be the same for every vendor you do business with? Now, you'll also find the assessment process becomes very manual. There's a distribution of spreadsheet questionnaires, and usually done over an unsecure medium, email. Sensitive security information, you have to understand, is going back and forth now in a distributed fashion. This poses a risk. Now, should this information get in the wrong hands, it can enable a hacker to really build a successful attack. Next, you got to look at the program that you've created for your organization. You built this individually to support your organization. But also, you have to know that it was built in a vacuum, just like every other company builds their program. But what happens here is this. The vendor really carries now that burden of having to support a vast variety of assessment demands from their customers. And this is increasing day after day. This produces misinterpretation of questions and inaccurate answers. There's a lot of back and forth that's required to validate the answers are complete and accurate. In short, a great deal of time is experienced in completing the assessment. So real quickly, you find that this model really doesn't scale. So what do? The key fact is, regardless how much time it takes you to do an assessment, you're going to find that you spend the majority of your time on just this one component alone. This is where a managed service provides the greatest value. So this component alone proves to be the most valuable area to your organization that employs a vendor risk managed service. 40 to 60% of your assessment time will be spent in this stage. This is an important fact that's really worth noting. Understand this, if you spend 40 hours or 140 hours on your assessment, you can rest assured that 40 to 60% of that time will be spent in this stage alone. Now, best practice and industry standards tell us no matter how much time you spend on an assessment, roughly 50% of that time will be spent on collection and validation. And 4 to 6 weeks of time can be spent just collecting the assessment information and validating its accuracy and completion. This is why assessments are very time-consuming and expensive. In addition, this requires continuous tracking and follow-up with your vendors for response and completion. Let's look at one more important fact here that needs to be called out. This entire area here, in the first component, this delivers the lowest value to your organization, but comes at the highest cost. This is why Cadence Security and the SEE group created Vendor Risk Managed Services. We can solve this problem for you. We bring experienced, certified third-party assessors and auditors to perform these assessments. We leverage a standardized, proven process backed by leading technology. This allows us to perform and complete a comprehensive assessment of your vendors. We start with working with you and your business to identify your critical vendors. So through leveraging a pre-assessment questionnaire, along with interviews, we're able to identify quickly the inherent risk of those vendors. Also understand the engagement profile. How are you leveraging that vendor, in what capacity and how? And also we're able to then identify from this process what those vendors have access to. Is it sensitive data? Is it applications? Is it systems? All the above. Then we have the ability to configure the appropriate questionnaire and the content collection requirements. We begin the assessment process at this time. And this is where we'll contact the vendor on your behalf and notify them of the assessment process. We introduce them to our assessment platform, where they're going to be greeted with the full assessment. Now, this platform that we leverage has a user interface that's very user-friendly and intuitive. It allows the vendor to invite additional resources to complete the assessment process if needed. There's intelligent-based questioning that also provides an efficient workflow process. There's also near real-time monitoring of the assessment platform. So what does that mean? This means that as the questions and the artifacts are completed and supplied, the assessors are then notified instantly. And this allows them to begin the review and the scoring process in concert with the assessment. And this is a very important fact, because this eliminates the need to wait for a completed survey before reviewing. It speeds up that assessment cycle and produces a lot of efficiencies. All the data that we're collecting is centrally located and secured with 256 persistent encryption. The assessors are leveraging a trust but verify assessment method. What this means is any content or answer that is in question is followed up with a one-on-one validation process with the vendor. After final review, the following reports are created and delivered, and I'll go through those quickly for you. The first report is an executive vendor risk state report. This is meant to provide a high-level snapshot and meant for your executive committee to have. This will give them real quickly and simply, who are my riskiest vendors and what are we going to do about it? Secondly is the vendor detail report. This is a referential report of all the content that was collected with the risk score broken down in detail. The third report is the most valuable and where you're going to spend most of your time. It's a recommended remediation and prioritization report. In short, what it does is it lists all the critical risks that were identified with the remediation recommendations. This enables your team to execute a remediation plan immediately. You can then meet with your business owner and discuss an action plan. Do we cease doing business with this vendor? Do we continue doing business and formulate a remediation plan with timelines? Comparing the results of our assessment process to others has shown an overall reduction in the assessment process of up to 70%. So, in summary, we help you get your assessments done. We help you get to scale and meet demand. we significantly decrease the overall assessment cycle. It's safe to say a vendor risk managed service will give you back up to 50% of your full-time employees' time. So let's go back to the primary components again. And we're going to focus on the last two. These last two primary components are what you and your teams are going to want to complete. They're the most impactful to your vendor risk management program and are the main reason for the assessment in the first place. So let's go through them briefly. Review and analyze the collected information on the second component. So what does this mean? You need to determine if the appropriate security controls for data privacy protection are in place. Secondly, you need to measure inherent risk based on criticality and vendor profile. This is going to allow you to understand what's the level of acceptable risk with the vendors you're doing business with based on how you're doing business with them. The third component is the findings component. This is where you're going to accept risk or you're going to identify the gaps for remediation. So the first thing you need to do is you need to determine what is going to be the acceptable risk and what risks are we not going to accept. And once we have that threshold, then we can determine what's going to require remediation. And then we break down the remediation. We need to execute that remediation plan with our vendors and our business owners to make sure everybody's in alignment and agreement. We need to track its progress. We need to understand, are we efficiently and effectively hitting the milestones that are required to get us to our specific timelines that we've accepted and agreed upon. Then what we need to do in the tracking process as well is understand and measure the risk after the remediation has taken place and what effect has it had on the overall risk management with that organization. And also reporting and data analytics of the data that's available from the assessment is going to be key here. So organizations that employ a third-party managed service, they realize the most effective use of their internal resources are really in these two primary components. And outsourcing the first component, collection and validation, this really frees up their time to focus on ensuring that the vendors meet, but more importantly, maintain an acceptable level of security requirements. So why choose a third-party risk managed service anyway? There's a lot of other options that could be considered. I'm going to go through a couple of them here. The first is you can build this internally. We reviewed this earlier on the slides in the earlier part of the presentation. So what's required? Well, you need to build a program and you need to understand the content needed that needs to be collected. You also need resources. You have to hire a team and they need to be trained on your program and trained on how to conduct assessments. So when your board asks you to quantify a budget estimate for this type of initiative, it's very difficult to accurately do that because there's a lot of other pieces that come into play here. And also, when they want to know when you're going to begin executing upon this and doing assessments of your vendors, it could take up to 2 years just to build this internally before you're at the point where you can actually assess your vendors. So let's look at the next option. You can purchase a tool. You can buy an application to help with this process. But again, it's just a tool, and it can only take you so far. And as we know in IT, a tool cannot give you a program. A tool is only as good as the program it supports. So you still need to build a program in the first place. Staff is still going to be required, so you still need a team. And then you have to look at the deployment scenarios that are going to be different for every organization to deploy an application in your environment. There's a lot of things to be taken into consideration. Does your company already have a governance, risk, and compliance repository for all your data? Or are you leveraging a GRC, an eGRC platform today? Or what are you leveraging from a vendor management? Is it an SAP? Is it Ariba? Do you want this data to be shared there? So there's a lot of different scenarios and things that need to be taken into consideration when you buy a tool from a deployment perspective. Then there's also training. You need to train the people that you've hired to do the assessments on this platform so that they're ready to go. When you look at all this, it comes down to be just more than the licensing of a tool in order to have a full-fledged and effective vendor risk management program in-house. And this can take, just buying a tool can take up to 18 months to get it deployed and in production and ready to go. So let's look at our third option. Just outsource the whole program. Put your hands up and say, I want nothing to do with it. The whole thing, I'm going to outsource it to a general consulting firm like Accenture or Deloitte or something of that nature, where our organization and procurement has a blended rate because our place uses a lot of bodies in a lot of different capacities. That gives us a very reasonable and aggressive rate that's blended across the company. So on the surface, it looks very cost effective. I don't have to do it. I can send it all out, and I get a really good, affordable, competitive rate. So you think that you're doing the most value to your organization. Well, not really. You're still going to need a program. Secondly, you're going to still need content. And you need to train these general consultants. I like to compare them to drone bees. They're generalists. They need to be given a specific task in writing, and you need to understand it and follow it to the letter. And they're effective. Other than that, they can't be paid to think. They need to be paid to do. So these people need to be trained. And you need to supply the content in the program. So at the end of the day, how much can this cost you really? It can be quite a bit of money. And in addition, it could take up to a year just to get this off the ground so that you're doing assessments. So your executives are looking for something that's more accurate, tangible, and fixed from a cost perspective. And they're looking for a short deployment cycle. They don't want to hear, we think it can cost this. And they don't want to hear, well, it could take 6 months to 2 years. We really don't know when we'll be in production. That doesn't cut it. They want a fixed cost, and they want to know when we're going to start getting assessments completed. So when you work with our managed service, this is exactly what we provide. We're giving you a fixed cost per vendor based on quantity in a prepaid annual or multi-year contract. And these assessments will begin on your vendors within 4 weeks or less time from the execution of contracts, and that's guaranteed. We have never gone beyond 4 weeks of contract execution to start assessments for a customer. So now that we've covered the options that are available for a managed service, or just for a vendor risk managed program rather, why Cadence Security? So let's go into a little bit of our differentiators and why you would choose us for a managed service. Well, it starts with the first tile. We're leveraging an industry standard for our content collection, the standard of information gathering and shared assessments. So those of you on the call that have been in third-party risk management for a while are probably familiar with the SIG or the SIG Lite or the SIG Full to be the standard questionnaire medium for assessments. This is what we leverage, is a standardized content. This has been created years ago by the top 10 global financial institutions. And it's a questionnaire to support the assessment of third parties exclusively. The second reason is our team, our bench. We leverage assessors that are in country for one. They're full-time employees of SCE Group and Cadence Security. But more importantly, they're exclusively experienced third-party assessors, and they're certified subject matter experts in third-party risk management. As you've noticed, as I've talked through this, we're leveraging a people, process, and technology model for our managed service. So after the people, and we talked about the standard process, there is a technology that we're leveraging on the back end. And this technology that we leverage is Prevalence Vendor Risk Manager Platform. This is a platform that's been out for many, many years. And it's been year over year regarded as a leader in the industry, in the leaders quadrant for Gartner and Forrester. This last tile is something I haven't spoken about yet. I'm going to go into that now. But when you leverage Cadence Security and the SCE group for third-party risk managed services, in addition to getting the assessment completed, you're also going to get continuous threat monitoring of all the vendors that were assessed for the duration of the contract period. So this is going to enable your organization to be in the know of any potential risks in near real time so that you can be proactive with your risk management process. So let's go into the real-time vendor monitoring now for a little bit. Vendor monitoring is becoming a priority more and more for organizations today. As you attend more of these third-party risk events and social get-togethers and these groups, you're going to find that what they talk about now is not much about the due diligence exercise of assessing that vendor, although very important to do so. But more importantly, it's the continuous monitoring of the vendor every day to ensure that they're keeping a level of risk that's acceptable to you. And anything that happens as an activity that promotes high risk to your organization, that you're notified as soon as possible on it. And that's what we provide in addition to doing the assessment, is the continuous monitoring. Put it bluntly, continuous monitoring is a proactive vendor risk management. So we offer this service inclusive to the assessment. And what happens is you're going to be notified in near real time of any incidents that would pose a risk to your organization. There's other companies that do offer this service, and I'm sure that you know of them and heard of them. And they provide a good level of cybersecurity from a continuous monitoring perspective. There's no doubt. But where they really fall short are in those categories of business risk. This is where Cadence Security and the SCE group excels. In addition to us providing the cybersecurity continuous monitoring, we're gathering real-time information, both public and private subscription-based, in the areas of, for example, operational risk, for one. Wouldn't you like to know of any potential merger and acquisition activity that could pose a risk to your business? Is an acquisition happening from an overseas company, for example? And if that's the case, how does that impact me and my business doing business with this vendor? And where will my data reside? Is it in country, out of country? Some of the questions that you may have. Another area that we're gathering information in is financial risk. Wouldn't you like to know if a vendor was recently delisted from the stock exchange, or if their Dun & Bradstreet or Bloomberg rating significantly dropped recently? Maybe this is a high-risk vendor because there's someone that's fully leveraged and depended upon by your organization. If that's the case, if they go out of business, how does this affect your business? How does it affect you? The third area that we're gathering information on for business risk is regulatory and legal risk. So wouldn't you like to know if there are any pending litigations with the vendors you're doing business with? Perhaps those pending litigations could have an impact on how you're doing business with them. How does that affect you? What if there's a patent infringement litigation pending on them on a software application that you're leveraging that they've developed? If they lose that case, how does that affect you in leveraging that application for you to perform your business? So in addition to the reporting provided by our managed service, we're also providing unlimited user read-only access to the Vendor Risk Manager application platform that we're leveraging. So what this does is it gives you the ability to see what vendor assessments have been completed, which ones are pending, and at what level of completion. You also have the ability to dynamically build your own analytical dashboards of the vendor risk data. And you can leverage this to support your vendor risk management program in a lot of different ways. And I want to thank everybody for joining today. This concludes our Value of the Third-Party Risk Managed Services webinar. My contact information is up here on the screen. For anyone that wishes to discuss further, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again, and have a great day.